We are going to talk about Asia, which stands as a growth anchor, as I mentioned, for the world, despite persistent global uncertainties that we all know so well, such as inflation and the political headwinds that are out there. We want to talk about the outlook for the region and the opportunities that exist to foster more equitable and sustainable growth. And we have a stellar panel here to tell us all about it. It gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce you to Benjamin Hung. He's the Chief Executive Officer for Asia for Standard Chartered Bank. Great pleasure to see you again. We had a great conversation last year. Yes. So I'm so thrilled you've come back to the stage to talk to me again. I didn't scare you off too much last year. And I'm very delighted to introduce you as well to Laura Cha, Chairman of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and Clearing Limited. Laura, it's a pleasure to have you on. I know you're feeling slightly under the weather, so thank you for coming. Laura is a trailblazer and has been a leading figurehead in the region for the world of finance. And of course, it's fantastic that you're a female boss as well. So thank you so much for coming on. And it also gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Tan See Leng, Second Minister for Trade and Industry for Singapore, and also Minister for Manpower for Singapore as well. He has a stellar career in finance and in business as well, don't you? So you're kind of crossing the divide. You've moved to the other side, you said, haven't you? A round of applause, please, for our panellists. Thank you very much. Okay, so Ben, let's start with you. You're CEO for Asia for Standard Chartered. You oversee some 21 markets and a big job and an amazing region you work with. I know you've worked for Standard Chartered for some 30 years now, so you've had a front row seat and witnessed this incredible growth trajectory that the continent's been on. Can you just tell us quickly about it in terms of what have been the key drivers historically and today?
Yeah, I mean, Asia for the last couple of decades have had phenomenal growth. But I think the best is yet to come. Now, the world is going through quite a challenging period through geopolitical tension, et cetera, and what we do see is globalization, as we used to enjoy, may give way increasingly to greater sense of regionalization. In a more regionalized world, I think Asia will become a more and more exciting, sizable, and formidable driver of growth. Just in this year, we expect 2/3 of world growth to come from Asia. And within that, there are a lot of fundamental and structural trends around the rise of middle class and therefore consumption, changing patterns of supply chain, new trade corridors, rise of affluent, and digitization. All these are quite structural opportunities we have yet to experience.
Laura, if I can bring you in now, of course, that Asia's growth story has been propelled by China. It's a story that we know very well, now the second largest economy in the world. A challenging 2 years, though, for China. What is it, just a bump in the road? I mean, we hear this talk of a Japanification of China. I mean, what is your outlook for the economy, would you say?
Well, I think China is looking positive. I think there are short-term, down, in the sense that short-term hurdles. The restructuring of the real estate sector, it's painful, but it has to be done. And the central government very openly saying that we want to see that restructure gone through. So, but then if we look beyond the immediate year or two, the trajectory for the Chinese economy is really huge in the sense that we have, what the mega trends nowadays is innovation and sustainability. And China is really in the forefront of innovation, with not only in terms of AI, but in a lot of other technology. China is leading the way, and that is recognized as well. Sustainability is an area that doesn't get a lot of mention in the international media, but Chinese government's commitment to decarbonize by the year 2060 is very serious. And I would say there's no other country in the world where the government set the policy and the private sector will follow. So we've seen, the number of EV, not only just export, but domestically, if you go to the large cities, Shanghai, Shenzhen, a large percentage are now EVs. And that's also one area. The other is, of course, in the solar and the wind turbine. China is the largest producer. But that's not enough, that's for export. But domestically, you could see that the demand driven by government policy. In a number of years going forward, the government will mandate new buildings, particularly commercial buildings, to have solar panel embedded glasses. So that is going to happen. And the same for automobiles. Not only do we have EV, but we also will have, glass in the car with the solar panel embedded. So the country's commitment to decarbonization is very serious.
And I do want to talk about sustainability in a lot more detail, just a few minutes. And Dr. Tan, before I come to you, I just want to ask Ben, do you agree with the outlook for China there? Would you...
I do agree. I think China, in the near term, will be less of a quantity driver, but more of a quality impetus. What Laura talked about, some of the EVs, the solar, renewable, the battery side of things, that's very exciting. So you can't paint China with one simple broad brush.
Yep.
There are a lot of sectorial opportunities which are quite exciting.
Dr. Tan See Leng, let's introduce you now and bring you in. Your position as a government minister for Singapore, people describe Singapore as being a gateway to the ASEAN markets. And I read that some believe that it's a silent rise of a global superpower, the ASEAN markets. By 2030, potentially could become the world's 4th largest economy. What are your predictions for your growth in your region?
Oh, I think it's very promising. And there's that prevailing sense of optimism within most of the countries within Southeast Asia and pretty much ASEAN. Over the last 2 decades, right up till just pre-COVID, our, on the average, GDP growth has exceeded many of the other emerging economies elsewhere. I think we're about 5.3%, 5.4%. If we continue to have that kind of growth, then indeed, I think by 2030, you would see the size of it growing fairly exponentially. And having said that, it's also blessed with a lot of good natural resources. So, for all the things that Laura talked about in terms of sustainability, lots of opportunity for green economy, green financing, and generally in terms of making sure that they are able to uplift the livelihoods and the lives of some 650 million, and most of whom are young.
Yeah.
In terms of the population demographics. I think the only exception, of course, is Singapore. Singapore is pretty much like Hong Kong. We do have aging population and falling birth rates, but all the rest of our surrounding economies have relatively young populations. So I think with that, they are hungry, hardworking, very highly educated. I think this is going to be a force we are very optimistic about.
Indeed. And we can't go through every of the 21 countries because we'll be here all day, but just pick out another, because in terms of your region that you're looking at as a massive growth spot for the future.
Well, the way I see Asia has 3 separate but very exciting engines. You have one that Laura talked about, which is Greater China.
Yep.
ASEAN, I fully agree with Minister. Almost like every economic bloc around the world, the Americans, Europeans, the Chinese, Asians, all want to deal with ASEAN, right, as a source of growth. I think the other bright spot will be India. India, I think, will go through both geopolitically, economically, and demographically a lot of things that they can reap the benefit going forward. And that is also driving that South Asian subcontinent. I'll add one more thing. Some of these, it's not just about the engines themselves, but the interconnectivity between those. And 2 of the corridors I see that's growing the fastest, one is actually China-ASEAN. The other one is ASEAN into the Middle East, which is another part of broader Asia that's growing phenomenally.
Yeah, we talked at length about the Middle East yesterday. It's fascinating, and the speed of change is extraordinary there, isn't it? Laura, I just want to talk about the growth opportunities for investors, and of course, building from your comments on sustainability. I read that China needs $20 trillion in investments over the next 15 years to deliver the sustainability goals it's pledged. And of course, where you sit, you can see the investment flows from the Hong Kong Exchange. So tell us a little bit about the flows that you're seeing coming into those areas and the pace of change that you're seeing.
I think there is a huge demand for capital in the transformation, in the decarbonization process. As you say, China will need $22 trillion in the next 15, 20 years to achieve its goal. So what we're going to see is that the technology aspect, we have the solar energy, we have the wind, we have the renewable. What is the next step? It's going to be technology breakthrough that will enable these renewable to be easily accessible, more cheaply available, rather than being expensive. And certainly the rest of Asia, in some of the developing countries, there's a great demand for cheaper renewables. And that technology breakthrough will require capital to fund. And that's where the capital market comes in. The exchange had, in the last 6 years, done some changes to our listing rule. One, we allowed pre-revenue biotech companies in 2018, and in 3 years, we saw our market becoming the second largest biotech fundraising center. Last year, we introduced a chapter on special technology, and that is the kind of technology that I'm talking about. So we will see that those demands will be met, and of course, investor interest will come. And I think these are very much part of the growth trajectory of Asia. And Ben talked about India, about our role in ASEAN and the Middle East. The exchange last year signed 2 MOUs. One is with Saudi, the second is with Indonesia. This is where we see our potential will be for collaboration.
Very exciting. Minister, to bring you in now, in terms of climate change, many of the countries in the ASEAN region are disproportionately affected by climate risk. And yet Singapore is very much at the forefront of sustainability and climate change. You know, you're known for innovation and technology and access to finance. So how much of a catalyst is sustainability for you and your region, do you think?
You know, for us in Singapore, I'm sure many of you would have been to my country. We're very, very small. So we don't have any natural resources. Innovation, particularly pertaining to both sustainability, climate change, they are existential for us. So you can imagine that all of the whole of government with all of the different sector agencies are fully on board on this thing. So for us, we believe that the way to do it is to establish strong partnerships, have framework, and to make sure that many of the standards in which you develop, because everything is so nascent. So if I may sort of broadly put it into 3 broad buckets. The first thing is obviously making sure that these projects are bankable, many of these new projects, so that the likes of Standard Chartered and so on can jump in. Some of the bonds can get listed in the Singapore Stock Exchange and also on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And you need to provide a very clear, standardized framework across the different markets that you deal with. Then, because of that predictability, the transparency, then funds can come in to bankroll some of these projects. The second thing, obviously, that the government must lead and facilitate some of these funding into new, very nascent projects, for instance, like low-carbon energy research that my government has put in, into studying green hydrogen. We recently also established, put up an RFP for ammonia end-to-end bunkering to even the combustion of ammonia to produce it as a means of generating electricity. The third part is establishing partnerships with like-minded partners. So to that end, many of the like-minded countries around the whole of ASEAN have come together where we have set renewable energy targets, zero emission targets, and now we're working towards the development of a regional power grid comprising of connections through subsea cables, whereby countries which have very resource-rich potential, whether it's hydroelectric power, solar, wind, even tidal energies, can reach out to countries that may not have that wherewithal, in terms of land size and constraints, but have the financial resources to access and help the flow of capital and also renewable energy resources so that you can open up the entire market.
I mean, it sounds a very optimistic future, doesn't it? Ben, I know you spend a lot of your day on the telephone to clients, to CEOs around this region, and there are risks, aren't there? There are problems in global trade. I know we talked last year a lot about the supply chain and the need for diversification. There's geopolitical tensions as well. So what are your clients telling you in terms of their headaches right now?
Yeah, there are challenges around a few areas. One, as we currently know, the Red Sea, for example, now having challenges, so the whole supply chain will have to reroute by the entire Africa. That adds to costs. In the past couple of years, there have been trade tariffs. There have been listed entities that can't do business with. So our clients are all focusing on how do they bring about better resilience. And that typically is about diversification, okay? So a lot of currently the factories of the world, it's still based primarily in China, and a lot of people want to do China plus one, China plus N. However, diversification also takes time. I'll give you
We
an
talked last year about that, and a year on, I don't know what kind of progress.
Still
was
takes
made.
time.
Yeah.
Just use textile garment, okay? The world's largest textile garment is from China. The second largest producer, manufacturer, and exporter is Bangladesh. But Bangladesh, 200 million people, is only less than an eighth of China's production capacity. So you need 8 Bangladeshis to take over.
Wow.
So you're saying, no, that's only one sector. You have electronics, you have footwear, you have refrigerated white goods, etc. So that takes time. The other component to consider is diversification and resilience in the near term may cost the consumers, right? Because right now, not a lot of countries can produce at the level of cost, level of quality, and level of volume the way China does. So resilience, all the CEOs I talk to are trying to diversify, but they're also trying to do trade-offs between cost, quality, resilience, and speed.
And Laura, as a business leader, I mean, how do you navigate these risks, especially the ones which are out of your control?
Well, it is a very good question and very difficult to answer in the sense that we deal with risk. And in terms of systemic risk, market risk, we manage it ourselves. And that is our job, our responsibility to maintain a robust market infrastructure. But geopolitical risk, which is what we face nowadays, the biggest element, is completely out of our control. And we have to navigate very carefully to manage these the risks. I can cite an example. A year and a half ago, there was the US come down with certain entity lists, and overnight we have to remove 500 derivative products from our market because of the US sanction. But within 2 days, those 500 were replaced immediately by the market on the equivalent of those removed by sanction. So the market has to react. We, of course, will do our part to make sure that the system is intact and can withstand a lot of the external risks. But you're right that geopolitical risk is very difficult to predict. And given this year with the US election, we don't know, but we have to make sure that at a time of uncertainty, we do our job by reinforcing and enhancing our own core strength.
Minister, you're nodding. I mean, would you like to come in on that? Or?
Yeah, well, I share their sentiments. We have taken on the added measure. I think we're even more susceptible and vulnerable. I mean, we're an open economy. The smallness of our country behooves us to do a lot of things to make sure that we're always going to be able to not just more than survive, but thrive in every crisis. So to that end itself, diversification obviously is one very big means in which we sort of manage the risk, given all these volatilities and geopolitical uncertainties. The second thing we've also done is that for some of the products, the more essential stuff, we've actually taken to stockpiling them ourselves. And we work with many of the private sector industries to make sure that there is enough stock for a certain number of a certain length of time. And we establish multiple, plurilateral and also bilateral supply chain agreements with like-minded partners. So we have got supply chain agreements with Australia, with China, with Japan, with South Korea, New Zealand, and also under the IPEF umbrella, we have a crisis sort of response network with the US as well. So through that, we also then ensure that we have a certain self-sufficiency whereby up to a certain percentage is done locally within the small country that we are.
Yeah.
Having said that, you cannot possibly, sort of manage every single risk, particularly in such a complex world. So we believe that the only sustainable advantage that any country can have is trust. Building that trust with your partners, being consistent, being transparent, and also being predictable. I think those are the underlying principles.
Which is very timely because that's the big theme here at WEF, rebuilding trust. You're nodding in agreement. I don't know if you want to come in or... I'm mindful we've got 4 minutes left, so I just want to kind of finish our panel talking about frictionless trade and the kind of mechanisms to create more. And Minister, to you first, if you don't mind, given we have a government official here, so it's very good to get both sides of the coin. The WTO says Asia must redouble its efforts to advance growth-enhancing reforms. So what are you working on in terms of growth-enhancing reforms to create frictionless trade within your region and, of course, with Greater China and Greater Asia?
I think in terms of the top of mind share and recall would be moving, our like-minded partners, and of course our own, population towards digitalization. I think it has to be, moving it forward in terms of, so whether it's through digital economy agreements, digital economic partnership agreements. So we've entered into such agreements with the UK, with, again, Australia, New Zealand, with South Korea. And we try to expand it, more so that you can then allow for a more seamless and paperless trading system. The second thing, obviously, is climate change sustainability, right? Given where we are today, I just came out of another session this morning on the coalition of leaders for energy transformation and energy transition. I think we need to think about not just from the perspective of costs alone, because I know that's top of mind for everyone. We need to think about sustainability. We need to think about security. And more importantly, we need to think really seriously about also reliability.
Okay. Minister, thank you. Laura, what would you say in terms of catalysing frictionless trade and the role that you see Hong Kong playing? What are your hopes?
Yeah, Hong Kong has always been a super connector. And as Ben said earlier, globalization has become regionalization. And I think the world is revolving around that. There will be corridors between these regions. And what is important, regionalization, the regions do not exist by themselves. It still need to be connected. And that's where Hong Kong's role as a super connector comes in, whether it's with China or with the rest of the trade corridors. As I said earlier, we're very much looking to the Middle East, which is a new area for us, less explored before, and we're focusing on that. So, when you talk about frictionless trade, I think there are factors that are outside of Hong Kong's control. But within our control, we try to establish more corridors, more connections, and in a fragmented world, one needs more connectivity and not less.
Absolutely, I know that you'll agree. And so what are your opinions, your ideas to solve or to create more frictionless trade?
Well, we believe in transparent trade, open trade, and frictionless trade. We very much support free trade pacts. The RCEP, the ASEAN Trade, CPTPP, we're fully supportive. Second, I want to echo what Minister said. I do think trade needs to be digitized. It's really, really paper-based. Yeah. But trade typically involves more than one country. So we do need interoperability around these digital trade policies across markets. The third one is the deployment of technology, let's say blockchain, to go deep-tier supply chain financing so that we can make trade more affordable and more inclusive all the way down to the 10th layer, 11th layer of all these SMEs to make trade more affordable.
And what kind of time frame are you looking at? Because they are grand plans, aren't they? Is it a decade ahead, or is it less than that, to try and implement and adopt these?
But personally, because it requires multi-jurisdictional effort, it won't be fast. I would say this is more of a 10-year horizon. But if our minds are all working together with a common purpose, I think the goal is pretty good.
I wanted to ask you what it means to the rest of us, or the rest of the world, because we're all watching kind of in awe of the growth that you're seeing in your region. But we have run out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you so much. That was really fascinating, and we've got a lot from that. So a big round of applause, please, for Ben, Laura, and for Minister. Thank you so much.